Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Take Heart. This weekend we're going to do a two-parter looking at the benefits of rest. And for me this is a really personal message because it's something that I've been discovering the importance of for all the wrong reasons, basically. When I was 29 years old, I had an emotional breakdown. It meant that I had to take some time out of work. I had to get some counseling. It was never obviously my plan to have that breakdown. And I had to work out how have I ended up in this space. One of the things that I've realized is that I had completely neglected what the Bible teaches about rest and resting well. And actually, it's not just what God teaches when it comes to rest, it's what he models for us. So the beginning of this idea of a Sabbath and a day of rest comes actually in Genesis chapter 2. So we read that in Genesis chapter 2 verse 1, God had completed the heavens and the earth, and then on the seventh day, he rested from all his work of creating. And the word rest there is where we get the word Sabbath from, or the word Shabbat, this idea of ceasing and celebrating. I think of it like me when I finish building an IKEA wardrobe. You know, I just sort of sit back and crack open a Diet Coke or something and just enjoy the glory of the thing that I have created. Well, God's kind of doing that, albeit his creation is more complicated than mine. But it's this idea of ceasing and celebrating and stopping and recharging and replenishing. And in the Genesis narrative, we read about how God blesses three things. The first one is the animals, be fruitful and multiply. The second are the human beings, be fruitful and multiply. And the third is the seventh day. And the implication of that is that when we practice this idea of resting on whatever, one day a week or something, that breathes life, it breathes fruitfulness into the other 6 days. It's counterintuitive, but actually on a human level, we do begin to get it when we look at something like an athlete. So top athletes, I don't know if you've ever watched a documentary on them on Netflix or Amazon or something like that, but you get an insight into behind the scenes. And one of the things that I'm always struck by is how they prioritize recovery. So they're not just all out there pushing their bodies to the absolute limit. They are doing that, but they're also recovering, and they pour millions of pounds into physios and cryogenic chambers and the best kind of drink and, you know, nutrients and all this sort of stuff that they get into their system, because they know that they've got to help the body recover if the body is going to perform well. Tomorrow, I want to talk about the benefits of rest and Sabbath for our relationship with God. But today, I just really want to simply focus on the fact that we were designed, you were made and I was made to need rest and to recover. Think about it like an iPhone or something. You know, when my phone is about to run out of battery, it flashes up on the screen, this little sign, 10% battery remaining. Now, at that point, I could ask, well, is there a law that says I have to recharge this phone? And of course, the answer to that is no. But if you don't recharge the phone, you know what is going to happen to it. In the same way, for years I was like, well, we're not living under the Old Testament law, you know, the 10 Commandments that talk about having a Sabbath. We're not living there anymore, so I don't need to have a Sabbath. Stop being so legalistic about it. And although it's true that we're no longer living under the law, actually, the fact that Sabbath comes in the story of creation shows that this is part of the rhythm of life. It's part of the way that we're made. And so that's not to say it legalistically has to be a 24-hour period every 7 days, but it is to give us the principle that we're made to need rest. And there will come points, and I'm sure you've had plenty of them, as I have in the last 2 months or whatever it's been, where we have little warning signs that flash up that tell us we only have 10% of our battery remaining. For me, one of my warning signs is I become very self-absorbed. You know, don't come to me with your problems. I've got enough of my own. Like, they fill my mind. All of my issues fills my head and my heart. Another sign for me that I'm got 10% of my battery remaining is that I'm not able to be present very well. I'm not present with God when I'm sitting there with him. I'm not present with people when I'm with them. And so those things tell me, you know what, you might want to recharge, because otherwise you're heading back towards burnout. There's this verse that I love in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. It's verse 24. And Paul compares the Christian journey to a race. And he says, run in such a way as to get the prize. Now, for the whole of my 20s, I interpreted that verse to mean run super fast. Bang. I interpreted it like the race that we were in was a 100-meter sprint. And actually, I've been discovering, I probably should have realized this before, but that we're actually running a marathon, not a sprint. And when you're running a marathon, pace is as important as speed. You know, there's no point running super fast and being ahead of the field for the first 9 miles if you can't make it to mile 26. And what we want to do is we want to get to a place where we see Jesus face to face and we're able to say, man, I left it all out on the course. You know, I left it all out on the racetrack. I couldn't have pushed any harder. But at the same time, we do want to get there. And we don't want to fall down at mile 15 or blow up at mile 20. So to do that, we've got to understand I need to pace myself here. That's actually a really important part of making sure I finish the race well and making sure I thrive on the journey. Practically, how do we do that? Recognizing that during this season, boundaries have become really blurred. Boundaries between work and life are already very blurred because you can work on your phone anywhere you are. But now many of us are working from home, it's even more blurred. What can we do to make sure that we practice this well? I'm no expert. Beth and I are trying to work it out. But here's a few things that we're trying. Number one, we're trying to plan rest in. I find that work always expands to fill whatever time I have. And so we're blocking time out. And we think, okay, if we block these days off for rest and we make sure we're really disciplined about that, then we can work around those and we can put other things in. But that's going to be clearly blocked off for rest. We find that helps. And a second thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to be disciplined on making sure that when we do block off a time that's really for total rest, we only do the things that replenish and recharge us. Obviously, the temptation is, because life involves admin and there's jobs to do around the house and all sorts of stuff like that, the temptation is to then use that time to take the bins out and sort the shopping out and clear the garden out, or whatever it is you've got to do. But we're trying to be like, no, we'll only do something on these days if it actually replenishes us. Abraham Lincoln once said, if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I would spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. I love that. We want to be effective in making a difference today. We want to live well as people in the relationships that God has blessed us with. We want to do this really, really well. One of the things that we want to do, if we want to do this well, is we want to rest to the best of our ability. It sharpens us. It's like sharpening the axe. And what it means is when we come out from that place of rest, we come out with our emotional energy recharged, we're re-envisioned, our creative juices are flowing, and we're better able to do everything that God has called us to do.